Sexual harassment is not a new issue, but it is one that has been illuminated over the last few years by some big names in the news regarding that. For instance, Donald Trump and that Access Hollywood tape, and now Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein. It's had a big impact on how Americans think about sexual harassment, but has that changed among men and women equally? This time on Poll Hub, sexual harassment in America. Let's get started. Hi, everybody. I'm J.D. Dapper. This is Poll Hub.
And I'm Lee Marigoff, director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, the director of the Marist Poll. And we are here in the Hancock Center at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Sexual harassment has been an issue for a really long time. I was thinking of Working Girl, all kinds of movies about men behaving badly with women in the workplace and elsewhere, going way back, right? It's been around, been a discussion for a long time. It seems to me that the Donald Trump Access Hollywood tape kind of was a watershed moment in that this was a major presidential candidate who at that point was, the candidate of a party on tape doing things that you just couldn't call anything other than sexual harassment. You could call it much worse, and many people did. Mm-hmm. And it kind of spread it open, laid it out there for everybody to see, and you had to confront it. And now we have Harvey Weinstein, one of the biggest Hollywood producers, most successful Hollywood producers, with descriptions from some of the biggest Hollywood stars of behavior that is unspeakable. You have been talking to Americans about what they think about sexual harassment in the workplace and elsewhere, and you were actually out in the field before the Harvey Weinstein.
We were, we were actually doing.
So the numbers would even be higher on some of these questions now than
presumably.
Than they were then.
We were doing a survey with the PBS program, Third Rail with OZY, and they were interested in looking at this issue. It's a debate show, and so they wanted to debate the topic. And one of the things we found, or we asked people, was how big a problem they actually think it is in the workplace. And I think one of the things that was very interesting is we asked a question that was actually asked 30 years ago by another polling group, the Time Yankelovich poll, no longer still in business, but they asked that question, and they found that only 17% of Americans at that time thought that sexual harassment in the workplace was a big problem.
That's 1986.
That's 1986.
Roughly 30 years ago.
And 30 years later, just last week, we found that 42% of Americans now call it a big problem, and another 45% think that it is a problem in the workplace.
One of the things that's really important in a survey that's as critically issue-focused as this one is you want to look at what men and women think on a question like this, and is there any differences or a similarity in viewpoint. And one of the things I thought that was surprising, and we don't get surprised often in this business, is that men and women did not differ greatly in terms of whether they thought this was a big problem or not. In fact, the numbers were in the low 40s for both men and women. So the sense that this is a big problem is shared across gender lines. Now, if it's not a big problem, no problem at all, men are still likely to say, yeah, we're not going to get worried about that. And by about almost 3 times as many men say, no problem.
Well, but to be fair, that's 16% of men
Sure.
who said that they didn't think it was a problem, compared to 6% among women
who don't think it's a problem. So in a
Exactly.
sense, there's a shared viewpoint, at least in terms of whether it's a problem, and some difference as to whether we just don't have to worry about it at all.
So on one hand, going back to 1986 proves really instructive in that a lot has changed. So you can look back at those movies in that era and say, oh, well, so much has changed. And so much has changed in public opinion, but not necessarily in the workplace, right? And then the other thing that strikes me about that is that, again, that men and women equally are seeing this in the same way, which on a gender issue is maybe it's our bias built in that we think it's not going to be that way, and it is. And there actually is equality in that. Is there a difference in whether people think this can be changed now? I mean, do Americans think that there's actually a way that we can, just acknowledging it is one thing, but is there a way to change it? Do people have any faith that it can happen?
I thought, one of the things that I found that was interesting, and certainly on this theme where regardless of gender, we all seem to be on the same page, is that people don't think that it's really inevitable that we need to have this problem in the workplace. Nearly 7 in 10 Americans, 69%, really felt that this is preventable. This isn't something that we really, need to deal with, in our work lives. And there was really no gender difference when it came to the idea of this is preventable and we can make changes for the better.
On the glass being half empty, though, 27% do think it's inevitable. So in a sense, this is, I think a more optimistic result than we thought we were going to get by doing this question, but still, clearly, work needs to be done on the issue.
Is there an age breakdown, or is the sample too small to get to age?
No. What was interesting is we actually didn't see an age difference on this.
So that's another assumption, right?
Yeah, and I expected that as well. I expected there not only to be a gender gap, but a generation gap, and we really didn't see that. Now, we also found that people feel that if we're going to solve this problem, it's really the responsibility of business. They don't really see it as something that individuals need to work out on their own, but this is something that needs to be dealt with at a company level. And to be dealt with by processes and rules and regulations within the companies themselves.
What happened to our free-spirited American can-do individualism on this question? All of a sudden, it's up to somebody else to fix this problem?
Here we were looking and doing some research on this in the EEOC report last year, found that 70% of people who experience harassment don't talk to a supervisor or a manager about that. So we find that it's a little rough.
So it's up to the company to fix it, except nobody's telling the company it's happening.
So they have to have a policy, and they have to be able to perhaps, because there's a difference in power relationships within organizations, and organizations which there are many more men in the executive positions, but women in the support staff positions.
Sure.
Then you get this kind of disparity where people are reluctant to come forward because they're fear of retaliation. There's legal obstacles to be concerned about, but clearly one solution to that is greater diversity at the higher levels of organizations so that it doesn't have this imbalance by gender in terms of the power.
Well, I think there's a lot at play here. I mean, if you do take even, the Hollywood, example with Weinstein, I mean, now you do have people coming forward, but they're talking about things that happened, decades ago.
And these are women who are incredibly powerful, big stars. If anybody should have or would have had the wherewithal and financial security and job security, even in Hollywood, very fickle, I understand, but to come forward and say something, Angelina Jolie, I don't think she's not going to get a movie if she said something about this. It is amazing.
I think it's very interesting, and I think there's also more really at play here in terms of how people interpret, what happens, between individuals in the workplace, and also how serious and concerned they are at the time. I think one of the other things when you talk about, is this really something that individuals need to deal with? I think what people are saying is that they don't want freedoms taken away, and it's not that everybody kind of needs to work things out on their own, but there are organizational structures that I think can create these kinds of situations. And I think what people are saying is it's helpful to have policies to protect people in both instances. I mean, when you talk about sexual harassment, sometimes it's not just the woman who is the victim. It can also be an executive who needs to protect themselves from false accusations. So policies and company policies and business policies within organizations really help structure relationships and an understanding of where the boundaries are.
Yeah, I'm also thinking in these numbers, there is, we're always looking for a political side to this, and I think that what's going on, what went on with the Clinton and the Trump campaigns, I think is showing up in some of these numbers. 67% of Americans do not think that women under pressure at work are weaker or more emotional than men.
Do not think.
Do not think.
So 2/3 do not think the stereotype of women being emotional and weak.
And I don't know if Donald Trump is having an impact on those feelings, but interestingly, again, men and women aren't all that dissimilar in their viewpoint on that. So
generations.
Yeah. So the age-old stereotype that women are more emotional and men blah blah blah. Well, it's not showing up in these numbers.
And you
I
would think
that's
that would be a generational thing, too.
Yeah.
People often point to, different, a different time, a different culture. But that's not what's, really happening.
There is a gender gap in one of these numbers that I spotted that we were talking about, and that is about the perception of men and women in the workplace and about resentment. And there's the question about, do men in the workplace often resent women who have more power than they do? My boss is a woman, I resent that. And there is a gender gap there.
Yeah, and interestingly, women do think that men resent women who have more power, and men say no, that they don't.
Yeah. So it's interesting.
Significantly so.
71% of women think that men resent women in that situation, and only 54% of men do. I am a little surprised, though, that the men number, again, this is just the bias here that I bring into this. I would have thought men would have been worse than that, actually.
No, but wait, no, it's a majority of men say that they don't feel that way. So it's actually a complete flip. So 71% of women do and 54% don't.
I would have thought it would have been 70-70. I would have thought it would have been that big. Because I don't know.
Well, that's why we do these surveys, Jay.
Well, though,
let the Americans tell us these things.
There was one other thing that did surprise me, and we asked whether you agree or disagree with this question. Men are easier to get along with at work. And interestingly, there was a little bit of a gender gap there too, because women tend to think that men are easier to get along with at work than men do.
That feeds that whole stereotype of women in the workplace, battling each other and all that kind of stuff.
Well,
not that men don't do that. I mean,
the funny thing
go to Wall Street.
The funny thing about stereotypes is sometimes it's based on what people think.
And that's why, again, we do these surveys. And I think this one we're going to come back to, I think, because I think there's some kind of underlying shift in public opinion going on. We've seen that in other issues just recently. I mean, the biggest issue in terms of same-sex marriage.
Same-sex marriage
went through this
sea change in no time at all. Yeah, I wonder if sexual harassment and the viewpoint towards that and the way that we view what sexual harassment really is, I wonder if we're in the midst of that. Sometimes you don't realize it until you've come to the other side of that, but maybe we're in that position, in that period right now.
Could be.
So switching gears now a little bit to another very important issue that we have heard about and spoken about that is in the news of late, racism in sports. We've certainly been hearing a lot about that with the NFL players protesting the national anthem. But certainly discrimination in sports is not new and nothing new to 2017. And we are very lucky today to have a special guest with us in our studio, editor, journalist, and author, Ray Robinson, who will take the long view. I don't want to completely out you, Mr. Robinson, but you can tell everybody how old you are. And full disclosure here, Ray is also Lee's father-in-law.
And I know how old he is also, but I'm not going to say.
You've seen quite a few people play, and many of the greats, including Babe Ruth.
In fact, Barb, he's the only person I know who saw Babe Ruth playing in person. So that's quite a feat right there.
Well, I also saw Lou Gehrig make his famous goodbye speech to baseball.
And that was in 1939.
1939, July 4th, 1939.
And I think you are one of the people who characterized that speech.
Well,
Quite
I think
famously.
many people have characterized it, but I think it's well worthy of being included in many anthologies of great speeches, even outside of sports.
And what did you refer to that speech as? I thought there was
Did I have one particular description?
Yeah, I think the Gettysburg Address.
Baseball's Gettysburg Address.
Yeah, which was really
It
very
no longer is an original statement.
But it was when you said it.
I think so at that time.
Okay, very good. So what are we talking about today?
So harken back a little bit. We're seeing certainly a lot of issues in our society playing out in sports as well. Sports figures having quite a prominent role and being role models for many people still. What do you think about some of the protests that have been going on and their place in sports today?
Well, the arguments and controversies over the issue you talk about are nothing new, except it's the first time in my memory that a group of men, a group of athletes, in this instance football athletes, have more or less gotten together to use the national anthem to better the situation of black men in the National Football League. And I think it's long overdue, by the way, but I don't think we've heard the last of it.
Mm-hmm. I'm struck also by the reaction that protest is getting, and I know we want to talk a lot about the times of Jackie Robinson, because that's a period that you know very, very well. And maybe, we're more than 70 years since Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in baseball. And I wondered if you could talk about the times of him and the period and what he went through to, in fact, get to that point.
Well, the thing that's very interesting about the emergence of Jackie as the baseball pioneer for black people, I had heard of him even as a 17 or 18-year-old high school student in New York City, because at UCLA, the University of California, Los Angeles, was emerging as a sports and athletic power. And the news of a wonderful athlete named Jackie Roosevelt Robinson was coming to New York from the West Coast. And it's very strange that a lot of the young fellows that I palled around with in my neighborhood decided they wanted to go to UCLA. And one of the reasons they wanted to go to UCLA was because of Jackie Robinson, who they were reading about. Jackie, you have to understand, was more than just a baseball pioneer. He played almost every sport and very well. As a matter of fact, his best sport was basketball, which he played well at UCLA. He also played a pretty good game of tennis, although he wasn't a first grade tennis player. That I knew a little about from my own experience because I played a couple of sets with Jackie later on in life.
Although, even though your last names are the same, there is no relation.
There's no relationship, no. Jackie was born in the Deep South, and many people considered, doctors for instance, considered that the disease that Jackie had for maybe the last 25 or 30 years of his life, which ultimately probably contributed to his death, came from eating an enormous amount of sugar in the South where he was raised.
Talk about the times, though, because now you have this gifted athlete, and he's now moving in the direction of baseball, and obviously there's a great deal of resentment and resistance to him becoming a professional ball player. So talk a little bit about how he as a person and how baseball as an organization responded to him.
Well, you have to understand that Jackie did not immediately emerge as a great baseball player. He had to play at the Army level, which he did, and then he had to play at a minor league level, which he also did. But that was a little limiting. He had to be brought up to the big leagues, which had been fighting the inclusion of black men into the rosters for many, many years, from the late 1800s until right up to the time that Jackie emerged as a great star of baseball and as the leader of the not intrusion, of course, that's the wrong word, the leader of the inclusion of baseball, black people, onto the rosters of Major League Baseball teams.
Did you see him play?
Oh, many times, yes.
What were your impressions of him as a player?
Well, I mean, anyone who knew a little bit about baseball knew that they were watching a great athlete. I mean, Jackie was not only a great athlete on the field, but he had the right temperament. He wanted to win. Whatever he did, he wanted to win. And it made him more than a little bit of what he was ultimately as a great baseball player.
Now, my understanding is he went originally to Montreal to play in the minor leagues. Branch Rickey had decided to move him along the process to get him to the major leagues. What was the response to his teammates, either in the minors in Montreal or when he finally got called up to play in Brooklyn?
Well, when he played in Montreal, there were men on the team that didn't particularly care to play with him, although they didn't make a big thing of it. He got a lot of newspaper copy in Montreal and outside of Montreal, and the expectation that somewhere along the line his performance as a great player and athlete would probably help to bring him into the major leagues was facilitated by a man named Branch Rickey, who had spent a lifetime in baseball as a baseball executive after originally being a very bad baseball catcher in the minor leagues. And it was because of Rickey's efforts and his beliefs that Jackie did finally emerge as a Major League Baseball player in the late 19, I guess it was 1939.
40s. Yeah, and then he entered in the 40s
right.
into the major leagues, I believe. And Branch Rickey sort of cut a deal, I understand, with Jackie Robinson, that recognizing that he was not going to be welcomed by everybody, he wanted to make sure that Jackie accepted that there was going to be harshness and difficulties breaking that color barrier.
I think that Jackie was well aware that he didn't need to be told by Branch Rickey, but Branch Rickey tried to get him ready for the barrage of insults and unpleasantness that would occur when he finally appeared on a baseball field, which happened to be Ebbets Field, where Brooklyn played its home games.
And I understand, and you may have actually seen this, I've read about it, opening day, Ralph Branca, who became much more famous for the shot heard round the world later on, was standing next to Jackie at the opening ceremonies, also that he was very accepting, because he told his teammates that this guy might help us win a pennant and a World Series. So let's,
Well, I think Ralph, who happened to be a pretty good right-handed pitcher for the Dodgers, also appreciated the fact he knew a little bit about Jackie and certainly had watched him play in practice, and he anticipated that Jackie was going to make it as a major league ball player and ultimately as a major league star. He was smart enough to know. Mr. Rickey knew a good deal about baseball.
And that Pee Wee Reese, of course, the Hall of Fame shortstop for the Dodgers. There's a story which I believe is true, that he at one point when Jackie was being razzed on the field and by fans in the stands, that Pee Wee came over and put his arm around Jackie Robinson, sort of as a imprimatur of acceptance.
Well, I think that's a good way of putting it. Pee Wee happened to be a decent human being, and in many respects he was probably a better human being than a shortstop. But he did contribute. He did contribute to the ultimate acceptance of Jackie on the field. He wasn't totally responsible for that acceptance, but I think he contributed heavily.
In other words, petitions by his own teammates?
Yes, some of his own teammates didn't want to play with him. It's a long time gone now, but there were certain men whose names were famous in baseball. Eddie Stanky was on the team with Jackie, and Dixie Walker was on the team with Jackie, and neither one of them really wanted to play with him. They made it pretty public that they didn't care to play with him.
You know, and we're still talking about race relations in sports today. Do you think that professional athletes have a social responsibility today to highlight issues of racial inequality, or do you think things have changed enough?
Oh, my feeling is, and I think it's a feeling of many people who've watched baseball for many years and followed it, that yes, indeed, you have many, many black men, for instance, who dominate the play in the National Football League. They are paid handsomely, but they are worthy of getting paid handsomely because it's a game at which you can very easily get hurt badly in playing, and the statistics bear that out. But I think, considering the dangers of the National Football League and considering the fame that these men have achieved through publicity, newspapers, books, magazines, etc., I think it's worthwhile that they take a stand, as they have been over the last few weeks. I don't think we've heard the last of them unless something strangely turns around politically in this country. I think that these men who are risking life and limb playing the very tough, difficult game of football should be applauded for taking a stand, but they should be together on their stand and not as individuals. They should unite, whatever the goal is, and that, at least in my opinion, that's what I think they should do.
Do you think there is a Branch Rickey out there today?
I haven't seen a Branch Rickey yet. Certainly the commissioner of the National Football League doesn't seem to me like another Branch Rickey. But who knows, things can change. And baseball, which at one time was very, very slow-moving in welcoming blacks into their lineups, has a very good commissioner now. And I think that he sounds to me like a very progressive human being. And I think if they need more favors from baseball, or if they need to make more progress. Mind you, I'm not suggesting baseball hasn't made progress. They've made a lot of progress in the last 30 years. Jackie didn't invent progress in baseball, he just contributed to it. But you have an awful lot of, you've had many baseball managers who are black, and many of them are very successful in the big leagues. And you have an enormous number of blacks who've come from the Caribbean, and many of whom have had their difficulties not only with breaking in on the ball field, but a little difficulty communicating. And I think a lot of the white players today, many of whom that I've heard about, have been very agreeable and trying to teach these guys the English language and have been friendly with them. And this isn't some fairy tale either. It's a true story. I'm not suggesting that all white ball players have changed their minds about playing on the same fields with black men, but what I am suggesting is that baseball has made, since Jackie, enormous progress on the field and socially, which is a tribute to some of the people who run the game today.
Ray, I'm struck by, thinking about that time and talking about in the present. Back then you had teammates of Jackie. We've talked about a Dixie Walker who was very against Jackie becoming part of his team, a Pee Wee Reese who welcomed him. There was the opposing manager, Ben Chapman, who was portrayed extensively in the movie 42 that was recently made about Jackie Robinson. A Red Barber, who I believe was from Mississippi himself, who had to come to terms and accept the presence of African American players in baseball. I'm just struck by your observations. What is it about? Was it their education, where they grew up? Ralph Branca grew up in a very integrated neighborhood outside New York City.
And I might add, one of 16 children.
So he had a ball team on his own.
I was about to say, he had a team of his own.
So what's it about? I mean, is it where they grew up? Is it their education? I mean, is it Ben Chapman faulted?
Well, I think Ben Chapman, despite his feelings, contributed enormously to the acceptance of black men in baseball. Ben Chapman was regarded by many of his associates, and I'm not exaggerating here when I say this, as just a miserable human being. Even though he wound up managing a team in baseball, he managed the Philadelphia Phillies for a while, but they finally got rid of him for many reasons.
One of which I assume was his...
One of which was the fact that he didn't contribute to the social welfare of the United States. He ultimately played at the same time as Jackie played for the Dodgers, and he was so nasty and unpleasant to Jackie that the newspapermen and the newspapers tried to bring the two of them together by posing them for pictures, and you could see that Chapman wanted nothing to do with it, and Jackie looked like he'd just as soon hit Chapman over the head with a bat.
Well, that's the famous baseball bat picture.
He was holding a bat in the picture, like he'd just as soon hit Chapman over the head with it.
Is it startling? I just know we have a couple more minutes, but is it startling to you as someone who grew up at a time when blacks didn't play in the majors, at least in the major leagues, and saw this transition to where we are today, to see now that on April 15th, everybody wears Jackie's number, 42, and we have Jackie Robinson Day in the major leagues to recognize who he was and what he represented?
Well, as a matter of fact, his wife, Rachel, who's still alive, contributed and has contributed enormously to furthering the reputation of Jackie. And I understand that a few years ago she was given, I think, the Eleanor Roosevelt Award, which was given her up at Hyde Park some years ago. I think it was 5 or 10 years ago. And she was very helpful to Jackie, very, very willing to help him put up with a lot of the nonsense that he had to put up with.
Okay, now, I'm a Yankee fan, so we're going to just wrap this up with a few pet peeves I have. I believe it was in the mid-'50s when Whitey Ford is pitching and Jackie Robinson's on third base, and he tries to steal home. Yogi Berra jumps in front, catches the ball, puts the tag on him. The ump calls him safe. Clearly he was out, wasn't he?
Well, I wasn't at the game, but I have seen any number of pictures of it, and I must say I have to disagree with you. I think he was safe. I think it was a right call. But even if it wasn't a right call, the mere fact that in a big World Series game, Jackie tried to steal home, which very few players would have done in that situation, I think that it's now generally accepted that he was safe.
Well, I don't know if I want to share that, but we will not edit that out. Mary Griffith, our executive producer, I'm looking at right now, we will allow that to be part of the official record. The tennis match you played with Jackie?
I'll have to give you a little background on this. I got to know Jackie through a very lovely guy named Alfred Duckett, who contributed to Jackie's first book called I Never Had It Made. And Duckett was a black man and a writer and a journalist and a very fine fellow. He was helpful to Jackie too, because he also, like Branch Rickey, had warned him of what he was going to be up against.
So, but before we do close, maybe we can also suggest, if people enjoyed listening to you today, they can also read some of the books that you have written as well. You've written a biography of Lou Gehrig.
Yes, I wrote mainly about his famous speech, but it is a biography. I've done a book about the...
And that's Iron Horse, right?
Iron Horse, yes. Correct. I did a book that I think a lot of people read, or at least I hope they did, about the famous Bobby Thompson home run that won a World Series for the New York Giants. And then many years later...
All right, I have to correct you. It won the pennant. The Yankees won the World Series in 1951.
Lee wasn't going to let that go.
It won the pennant. The Giants win the pennant. The Giants win the pennant.
You're right. I'm corrected. Let's say it got the Giants into the World Series.
And you've also written a very fun little book called Famous Last Words.
Yes.
Do you have any favorite famous last words?
Well, some of the words have been published in books and are serious comments. Some of them are, humorous and jokes that may or may not have been uttered. Because after all, when someone dies and you want your words remembered, you have to have somebody standing next to you. And this usually doesn't happen.
Probably an editor.
Or a ghostwriter or something.
Or a ghostwriter or just a sneak.
All right. So, all right, we're going to sign off. I want people to know you promised something about age. I will only say that Ray Robinson was born during the time that Woodrow Wilson was president.
Well, not during the time. He was the president at the time.
And that in polling, we never ask people how old they are. People are very resistant to tell us their age, but we ask people what year they were born in. And people are very proud of the year they were born in.
Well, do you really want to know?
Absolutely.
Or are you just a sneak?
I'm a sneak and I want to know.
I was born on December 4th, 1920 in New York City. And they tell me I was born at home, so I'll have to accept that.
And we know what your first words were. Wah. Most memorable moment in sports or the best athlete you ever saw? Either one.
That's not an easy one because athletes, are you including all sports?
Yeah, let's stay with baseball today.
Oh, in baseball? I'd have to deprive Jackie of that honor. I think he comes darn close. But in my remembrance, Willie Mays was the greatest baseball player I ever saw. And many people agree with me, some don't. But I'd say if I choose Willie, I'd choose Jackie as a close second.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Ray.
You're welcome, I'm sure.
So that will do it for this episode of Poll Hub, a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College. We want to thank our wonderful executive producer, Mary Griffith, who makes this all happen.
And we want to encourage people to send questions to pollhub@marist.edu. We want to see those questions. We want to get a sense of what we're talking about and what you want to hear us talk about.
And you can check us out on Poll Hub on social media, too. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter, Marist Poll on Facebook, and we're on Snapchat and Instagram as well. Any of those places you reach out to us, we will get back to you. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening right now. There's a subscribe button. Tap it on your phone or computer, and then you'll get the latest episode of Poll Hub as it becomes released. And you can listen to it at your leisure. Or is it leisure? We're going to have to do a poll to see which people prefer.
I would prefer it be leisure.
Leisure. Yeah, leisure. We'll see how that comes out.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good week,
Have a good
everybody.
week.